Does modern technology signify a triumph over nature, or does it create a world where God is no longer necessary? When we look at the last century, are we witnessing a cultural battle between science and religion, or a complex evolving dialogue? These questions lie at the heart of our contemporary moment, where the boundary between humanity and its invention is not only blurred, but has also reshaped the landscape of religious belief in the 20th and 21st centuries. If you could transport a person from the year 1926 to the year 2026, the most shocking change would not be political, but technological. From the splitting of the atom to the mapping of the human genome, the last 100 years has seen scientific advancements that challenge traditional frameworks. At the same time, this era of technoscience has placed unchecked power in human hands, raising sharp new questions about ethics, consciousness, and the definition of life itself. The standard story often goes that science and religion have been locked in an eternal war for supremacy. But a closer look into the history reveals that their separation is more of a relatively modern phenomenon. For centuries in the West, to not believe in gods was irrational. In the medieval and early modern periods, understanding the natural world was not separate from knowledge of the divine. But theology and natural philosophy were not always meant to be. The dawn of the 20th century shattered classical views of the universe, setting the stage for a new, counterintuitive truth. Einstein and the subsequent development of quantum mechanics did more than just revolutionize physics. They forced a re examination of causality, determination, determinism, and the nature of reality. Graduating beyond Newton, Graduating beyond Newton's corpuscular physics and Darwin's origins turned attention toward Big Bang cosmology, constructing a deeply connected cosmic narrative. Following World War II, the acceleration of technological advancement forced theologians around the globe to grapple with the ability of humanity to destroy itself and the environment. This led to calls for a science engaged theology that navigates religious faith in a rapidly evolving world. Symbolized by the atomic bomb, this era made theology become more engaged with the ethical, existential, and practical realities of a technologically advanced society. We are currently living through an era of exponential growth, where the pace of discovery has transformed human civilization faster in the last 50 years than in the previous 500. In today's lecture, let us examine how this rapid technological expansion has shaped and influenced the dialogue between science and religion. We will explore why the severing of their symbiotic relationship gradually transformed our epistemologies, our societies, and ultimately ourselves. We will also consider movements from the scientific revolution to the nuclear age that continue to impact Western society. Instead of framing history as a linear march toward secular modernity, let us investigate the real story of modern technology, that of humanity's stubborn effort not just to manipulate the natural world, but to become masters of nature. We will fast forward to the part when modern scientists birthed a new religion of technology, worshiping technical application as the next step in human progress and salvation. Understanding this will be essential for many of your assignments this semester, particularly regarding the ongoing relationship between scientific advancements and religious faith. Grab a snack and your notebook, and remember to post your YouTube comments onto Canvas. Tradition dictates that the history of science and technology rests on a neatly established timeline. The standard story goes that ancient intuitive knowledge systems were revived by classicalists in the late medieval philosophizing of the natural world, stimulating centuries of inventions, holistic trials, and ethical errors, eventuating in familiar industries ostensibly more humane and less centered on topics of discovery or self interest. Let us trace a new chronology flowing from the counter narrative that Western science is a uniquely consequential event which empowered Eurocentrism globally after it came to define modern civilization as the inevitable conclusion to all previous world histories. There is much conjecture surrounding precisely when and exactly where modernity itself inaugurated. At the centuries of resistance, revolution, and enlightenment, the booming industrial 19th century, the biology, physics, and military fissures of the 20th century, in our new canon, the emergence of modern technology will be punctuated by three approximations, including the grand parties of 15 to 1600, the modern epoch of 17 to 1800, and the early postmodernism period from 1900 to today. Each advent helped catapult science onto the global stage as a branch of learning and academic discipline and a socio-political force. For brevity's sake, our excursion into science history will maintain careful peripheral vision toward simultaneous world changing factors arising from the Middle Ages and through industrialization, but it will not be elaborated further. To name a few, the tours of Columbus in 1492, the pivotal Protestant Reformation in 1517, and the bloody French Revolution in 1789 sum up significant historical touchstones and corresponding conflicts which progress provoked, things like colonialism, capitalism, and nation states. Even as technology became integral to the modern world, contemporaneity cradled at the rebirth of antiquity in Europe. Its impetus was an effort to understand and master the natural world through science and instruments rather than through metaphysics and magic. Its Renaissance aspect was a philosophical tabula rasa of praxes, complemented by the first observatories, global maps, and printing presses. Salvaging leftovers from classical thought and testing them out on nebulous scientific methods would pave the way for Copernicus and his deflating of humanity's geocentric ego. Newton's Principia drove the synthesis of corpuscular based theories and further unburdened the yoke of superstition by demystifying the universe. Copernicus, Newton, and their kind also hinted at the emergent imbrication of science and faith. Concerning instruments like the telescope and the microscope, some argued that only empirical evidence should suffice as real data. Others feared prying too much into God's creation, and still others simply marveled at the universe's sheer beauty, orderliness, and meticulousness. Modern philosophy is rooted here with partitions away from natural theology, epistemic truth, and above all, the discredited corpus Aristotelicum, as seen among materialists akin to Galileo, Hobbes, Descartes, and Locke. Revolutionary aspects came gradually as progress necessitated increasingly sophisticated lab equipment, critical theories, and scientific societies. These implementations heralded the dawning of a European intellectual movement wherever reason and individualism soared above the political fray, though not high enough, for this grand enlightenment also jettisoned pernicious pseudoscience, which, when firmly planted, sprouted roots for masterminds to craft an axis of evil called race, characterized by physical traits and national affiliation. 1833 witnessed the etymological rise of a new creature who no longer fit the description of an armchair theorist. The lab coat scientist was a step up from the wigged natural philosopher of yesteryear. Both represented middle class gentlemen with prestigious qualifications. Technical proficiency, however, offered more than just functional artisanship. Their pragmatic usefulness for enhancing public welfare was initially enough to avert and delay most criticism, but not even the scientists themselves anticipated the practical cost of accepting their newfound authority. On the one hand, they dramatically upgraded the experience of millions through the mass production of prototypes that enabled learning through the pencil and the chalkboard, leisure through the camera and the Ferris wheel, and travel through the locomotive and the airplane, sustaining lifestyles inconceivable just decades ago. On the other hand, the distinguished white collar scientists also co evolved with the marginalization of women, the exclusion of ethnic minorities, and the curbing of subaltern voices within the science community. The scientist and his concomitant affixes were not fashionable until the late 19th century, when a looming storm brought the smartest tinkerers of the last 2 centuries up to task, coining the newly minted professional scientist, salaried by industry tech giants with the power to combat epidemics and facilitate war. The construal that science is modernity's propeller would soon become an article of faith with extensive academic implications and political consequences. Academically, the notion of scientism helped to catalyze several subdisciplines entrenched in the university. Politically, one could not function within society unless they had a working understanding of time zones, electronics, sanitation, dietetics, and so on. Thus, modernity's betrothal to technology was never a purely academic marriage. The love child named utility, which resulted from this union, quickly grew into the key justification for civilizing missions and economic expansion, and the aftershock of these seismic episodes still reverberate. Modernity has long been associated with social and technological advancement. On this principle, many 20th century scholars developed theories of society in tandem with science. Robert Merton identified four uncodified norms of a scientific ethos: universalism, communality, disinterestedness, and organized skepticism, which he believed could bolster neutral value neutrality. Democratizing science was consistent with the continuum propagated by Karl Popper, who saw civilization as evolving from primitive, closed off circles to one open and liberal society. The sobering shift in self understanding reached a boiling point for Popper, who remained dubious as to whether science and epistemology were strictly compatible on grounds of falsifiability. Given that advances in the field are ongoing, to what degree could science count anything as infallible? The realization that progress, for its own sake, harbored problematic implications would come to a head after what historian Christian Bailey calls the Great Acceleration of 1890 to 1914. This was an episode in which turn of the century scientists, swept up in the winds of change, took frustrated notice at their publications and curricula constantly rendered obsolete by the ceaseless onslaught of the next big idea, discovery, name, or invention. Technologies of this era secured the newfangled ability for long distance communication and other curious gadgets that satisfied a growing appetite for novelty and convenience. Things like the light bulb, the motor car, the radio, and the refrigerator. It also served to quell the disquietude that modernity itself was sprinting towards who knew where, prompting historians to rethink how past triumphs and failures would impact future generations. The internalist Alexander Korr focused squarely on factors of human cognition as a categorical framework, eschewing the influence of philosophy, metaphysics, and religion. The externalist Boris Hessen was more concerned about the non cognitive socio political conditions on which theories have stood. Core and Hessen typify a vast range of disagreement in the realm of science and historiography. Stephen Shapin, in Lowering the Tone, seeks to mitigate the hagiographic habits of Western memory by humanizing scientists, encapsulated in Daindroff's court jester speaking truth to power. Science, for all its undeniable benefits, has always been an inherently deficient human endeavor motivated by imperfect, historically situated human beings. Since the war torn 1900s, postmodern concepts have denoted healthy skepticism, stable political societies, the impersonal metropolis, nuclear families, free market activity, technological progression, and especially secularism. Even the metaphors deployed to categorize civilization resorted to the language of architecture, building sturdy foundations upon dilapidated structures from earlier times, and regarding outdated models, practices, and tools as the literal ruins that carried us over the threshold. Mediums and the visual arts engendered creative minds such as Carl Schinkel, who painted modernism with efflorescence comparable to Golden Age Greece. Soon after this romanticism waned, however, the optimistic exhilaration associated with scientific breakthrough had become lackluster to some and disorienting to others. As the scientists adjusted culturally, so did the standard story. But the edifice could only be expanded upon, not remodeled. Certain milestones like Newtonian physics, thermodynamics, and penicillin remained permanent fixtures. Scientism had manufactured such a persona for objectivity and autonomy that medical doctors, sociologists, engineers, and the like clamored to be accepted publicly as applied sciences. Industrial experts became increasingly vital to the livelihood of cutting edge, high tech firms where they monitored the logistics and quality of their employers' goods and services. By the 20th century, these hands on specialists were in such high demand that they gained elite status and migrated effortlessly between academies, corporations, and government committees. Their savviness made them valuable, but also troublesome whenever infighting within the science community spilled into public domains, blurring the line between professionals and pretenders. Vannevar Bush was an American researcher who spearheaded the Manhattan Project, which utilized the first radars, microwaves, and atomic bombs. Authorities like Bush dispensed state of the art managerial support, and in return, the states sponsored ever large scale facilities necessary for big science, things like biolabs and particle accelerators. Meanwhile, small science still made waves. Physicist Donald Glaser grew dispelled at bureaucratization and was utterly mortified when his own invention, the bubble chamber, was militarized to conduct dangerous hydrogen gas experiments. Other names from this era intensified change and leveraged ideas from the promising conceptual level to widespread expropriation, setting an example to wield science's double edged sword more responsibly within socio political and natural environments. Popular culture remembers Robert Oppenheimer as the American Prometheus, morally split between his pride and guilt and eternally punished for imparting to humanity the munitions of nuclear war exhibited at Hiroshima 1945. Bird and Sherwin brilliantly illustrate him after the supreme trickster god that stole fire from Zeus and gifted it to mortals, who then repurposed it in the form of equipment, gnosis, and culture. Oppenheimer's own celebrity is partial to a larger obstacle of apotheosizing even the most polarizing science pioneers. Typical accounts skip hurriedly to his linchpin boldness in the U.S. arms race, never pausing, for example, to appreciate the fact that dignitaries present at the top secret Trinity test took cover in desert dirt while unsuspecting Mexicans downwind watched in shock and horror. Instead, history reduces this mega project down to one name from a Rolodex of equally liable technicians and politicians. Nuclear power has the potential to treat certain cancers, to solve energy crises, and to fuel space exploration. Of all the designs to proceed and succeeded, the atomic bomb is by far one of the most iconic and volatile forces yet to be harnessed. For better or worse, its mutually assured destruction is arguably the widest convincing foreign policy initiative to prevent world war. The same human elements that inspire some inventors are the same noose from which they do hang. Science might be beneficial, and technology may fulfill a surplus of utilities, but not perfectly so. Utility and longevity are strange bedfellows. Many of the infrastructures are frankly not built to last. The term modern comes with the applied association of all things fresh, exciting, and up to date. Nonetheless, today's quintessential devices that run our world, cars, computers, and smartphones, are expensive to make, easy to break, and rapidly depreciate, and they still show no signs of plateauing. The final point I want to drive home is that technologically forward societies did not just spring forth from intellectual Europe and into some featureless vacuum of acontextuality. The framework matters. If we measure science according to a criteria that protects its bad actors, then we risk hastily dismissing due criticism and stubbornly deferring to tenuous authority. Our job as science custodians should be the neutral safeguards and objective verifiers of its history. Civilization evolved like any human. From its infancy in antiquity to the juvenile middle period, the pubescent 15 to 1800s, and through the 21st century young adulthood. Our skirmish here has chronicled some precursors related to the understanding that storytellers of science failed on two fronts: checking their scientism at the door and reading between the historiographical lines. This present thesis remains consistent with my own current doctoral research about recovering religion's loss of moral authority after its monopoly on ontology and epistemology faded. The rationale behind pursuing this field was partly inspired by the controversial sentiment that reason has long at last supplanted faith, expressed emphatically in existentialists like Nietzsche and his eulogy that belief in the Christian God perished by our own hands. To wit, I submit that when it comes to the history of anything, one must assume nothing and question everything. In that vein, one must also avoid the anachronism of judging people from different time periods too loosely or too harshly, as if recent societies are more superior. Postmodernism has come to represent the previously undivorceable bond between science and progress, public and private, utility and universality. However, despite its attempt to push back on the ramifications of the last 500 years, postmodernity itself is so dependent upon technology that the entire house of cards, dubbed the Information Age, stands just one cataclysm away from a regress to the non electric days of old.